Okay, thank you very much. I've had the great delight of being in Oslo a number of times. I've given several presentations in the city. Some of you may have seen some of my presentations before, but on the event of the opening of Reprogramming the City, I recreated the second half completely from the ground up. That's why I refer to this presentation as the director's cut. Okay, this is what I wanted to kind of tell a lot of people in the past, but I didn't have the time or the opportunity to. I always begin with a specific project because it's important for me to say that I created the Reprogramming the City project roughly 10 years ago. I've been working with it around the world. But in addition to being the curator of the exhibition, which I hope you all see, I'm also a practitioner. I create strategies for cities. I create design and resourcefulness strategies for cities using existing assets. In Jesolo, Italy, just outside of Venice, Venice is on the horizon here, the city came to me and said, we would like to resuscitate spaces around the city. We have a lot of spaces that need a lot of love, but we don't have any resources. And I said, well, that's just not true, because cities have a tremendous amount of resources, but they don't necessarily see them as resources. You've got all the material, all the physical stuff that goes into making a city, the pipes. A tremendous resource is the work crews, the actual municipal work crews who work with this material every day, the knowledge that they have in working with the material, of fabricating material for the streets. So partnering the material with the work crews, with the skill sets that are embodied in the city, and a team of designers, you can use lampposts to create maybe a giant musical instrument. Or you can work with the lighting department, the safety department, and actually take old broken traffic lights and repurpose them into a giant tic-tac-toe board for people to play while they're moving around space. And it's possible to actually take the empty, dead spaces of the city and the material, the very kind of functional objects that make up the city, and combine the two to actually essentially recycle the city, to create a closed ecosystem of opportunity where the spaces and the material of the city, that everything, if you were to kind of put walls up around the city, you have everything you need right inside that city to regenerate spaces. An extension of that is what we're talking about here with Reprogramming the City, of looking at how the city, how all the existing assets of the city, all the bits and pieces, from buildings to urban infrastructure to dead spaces to just corners, how everything within the city can be reimagined, can be repurposed for new use, for additional functionality. When DOGA asked me to give this talk, as I said, because I've given several, they said, we want you to go big picture. We want you to kind of zoom out. Normally I give many, many examples of individual projects that have repurposed, that have kind of reimagined urban assets for new uses. They said, we want you to zoom out to give the big picture. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going way, 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 way out. And the task today, we have only in the next kind of 12 minutes that we have, is one simple one, but it's not actually that simple. The purpose of today's training is to defeat yesterday's understanding, a great quote from a 16th century swordsman. And that's really what is absolutely essential as we go ahead, and that's the ethos of Reprogramming the City, of going forward and completely reimagining and defeating our previous understanding. Begin with a little story. In Buddhism, there's a very famous story known as the teacup story. There's dozens of variations. There's many, many different kind of lessons to be learned from it. But the story generally goes like this. Now, a very successful individual from the village went to a Buddhist monk and said, I want to understand the universe. I want enlightenment. I want to have a fulfillment of understanding. And so the Buddhist monk said, okay, sit down, I'll pour you a cup of tea. And he poured the cup of tea until it just began overflowing. And the man said, you fool, what are you doing? You can't fit any more tea in that. I didn't come for this mess. I came to be enlightened. And the monk said, exactly. You are so full with your conceived notions that there is no more room in you for anything else. So the challenge today is to begin with an empty teacup. The challenge today is to just forget what we know about the city. When you see the exhibition, and please do, because that gives you a much more thorough understanding than I could possibly do in the minutes we have here, is to empty your mind and to begin again. And that's the most tough thing in the world, to unlearn what you know and see the city differently. And that is reprogramming the city. I'll give you a few examples of that and what these examples mean. This bridge in Stockholm does what bridges do. Now, from whether you're an urban planner, an architect, or just an individual, you look at this bridge and you say, okay, that's a bridge. That moves people from one side of the water to the other. And it does. But vision division architects looked at this bridge and saw there's a tremendous opportunity here for cultural spaces under the bridge, for this kind of new walking promenade over the arch of the bridge. So they looked at this bridge with a new understanding of saying, okay, well, the bridge isn't just what we think of a bridge. A bridge can also be this. They did, and our first lesson is looking for the extra ability in urban structures. They discovered the extra ability that is contained in this bridge. In Hong Kong, and this is where Reprogramming the City began 10 years ago. In Hong Kong, I was working in Hong Kong, and the density of the city, I always find tremendously inspiring how this extreme density of the city inspires people to kind of use the city in completely new ways. Street traders will design hooks and attachments specifically to turn a fence into kind of a public market space. And there's a tremendous amount of kind of ground activity about recreating the city. But in a dense city like Hong Kong, where you need social spaces, you need kind of these spaces to, as Hans said, to kind of be a human being, to live. But in spaces like the Central Business District, there really is no space. There is almost literally no space. And so you see this staircase and you realize, well, that's just a staircase. It does what staircases are supposed to do. But what if we thought about a staircase being something completely different? What if it was possible to have a staircase be a place for rest and relaxation and social encounters? A space where people can meet at night, have a drink from the bar next to the stairway, which normally just has people inside, and they come outside and they meet and they gather. And suddenly, this stairway is an incredibly dynamic object within the city, and it's a space for social activity. It's a space for social rest, restoration, and gathering. What this represents, what that stairway represents, lesson 2, is identifying an underperforming asset. Businesses are very good at identifying underperforming assets, maybe a line of their business, a piece of real estate, a team that could do more. As a city, Reprogramming the City asks cities to think about underperforming assets. What things do you have in the city that could do more? Now, when we talk about reprogramming our understanding of the city, of reprogramming how cities work and function, it doesn't only have to be objects. In Amsterdam, it's got some just trash sitting out there, and realizing that there's actually opportunities within this system, this systematic thing of there's trash day, and you put stuff in the bin that you consider refuse. The Dutch design firm Varmakers looked at this and realized there's an opportunity to kind of get in the middle of that system, creating the godzak, the good sack, where people, when they're finished with something, rather than throwing it out, they can put it in this sack for others to kind of open up the sack and go into and get things that they might like, whether it's an old Ernie doll or an old keyboard or a racket. So you're creating a system within a system, a free cycling system within the trash system. People are already programmed to once a week, put stuff in a bag to throw out. So why not expand the value of that system? Why not kind of look for a layered value in urban systems? So many systems, so many customs exist in the municipalities. Just these basic functional things, and no one thinks about breaking it open and think about doing more. So if you looked at all the assets of the city, the systems, all the objects. If you looked at everything in the city, just going around this image here, in the top middle, you've got buses. Well, in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and a growing number of cities, they're using decommissioned city buses for mobile sanitation units for homeless people, so homeless people can take a shower or get a new set of clothes and really allow them to kind of feel better about themselves. Scaffolding. You've got soft walks in New York turning scaffolding into public seating areas. I could give you a dozen examples, and I invite you to go to the exhibition. This is that moment where I don't have time to go as deep into all these examples as I can, but I can share with you the principles behind reprogramming the city. And that is, the principles are looking at all the objects of the city and realizing that there is an opportunity to use the city's existing assets to provide for people, to produce local food, clean air, and fresh water, to protect people by housing, shelter, and security, integrating, connecting people, using the actual kind of physical infrastructure of the city as social spaces, as spaces to connect and integrate people, to enable energy and harvesting of kinetics. Stockholm Central Station uses the excess body heat from passengers to warm the neighboring building, to generate and treat assets as platforms for possibility, and finally to innovate, to use the physical city as an entrepreneurial zone. Now, a lot of you say that's really good and that's kind of some very clever ideas, but how do I kind of go about it? And this is speaking to people that may work in the city, may work for the municipality, but also as individuals to come up with your own ideas. In the exhibition, the very last space is a space asking you, what would you do? What would you do to change the way the city works? So when you want to get into kind of how reprogramming the city works, the first is ask yourself, what is the opportunity? Now, we often think about, from a city perspective, we think about need as the driving thing. Reprogramming the city looks at the city as opportunity, of looking at an object and thinking, what else could it do? We've got 3 levels of opportunity. There's material opportunity. All the fabric, the urban fabric, everything that makes up the city. We saw in Yasalo how that can be completely recycled and repurposed into rejuvenating spaces. Well, let's look at kind of some of the unsung material of the city. Fire hydrants. Now, we ran a workshop, and in Montreal, there's a great need for more public drinking spaces, drinking fountains, etc. If you really think about it, it takes an incredible amount of money and material to put in a new water fountain. There's water infrastructure, there's pipes to lay, there's the source to figure out. But in North America, the water that feeds the fire hydrant system comes from the drinking water. It's the same water source. So in this workshop, some people began kind of thinking, what if we created a public drinking fountain from fire hydrants? What if all the fire hydrants around the city had an additional functionality, that they were drinking fountains? This was the beginning of what's known as Project Borneo. These objects which turned fire hydrants into public drinking fountains. They've been designed in collaboration with the fire department, and so the wrenches that are needed is the same that the fire department would normally use, and if these need to be used in case of emergency, the fire department just comes and unscrews the drinking fountain and it becomes a regular fire hydrant. But it does something more. It does additional function in the city. It's taking one piece of the urban infrastructure and increasing its functionality in the city. You have meanwhile opportunity. Now this is more kind of, it lifts the spirit. When you have a construction site, this is in India, in Surat, India. When you've got a construction site, these water pipes are going to go underground and form part of the water's infrastructure, but there's a period of time where they'll just sit there and they'll wait for the crew to come along. So why not turn them into kind of an exceptional part of the city in that meanwhile space, before they kind of get buried? Let's turn them into something which just kind of makes people smile. And the third level of opportunity is what I refer to as metamorphic opportunity. One of the great examples, and it's in the exhibition, is this bus stop from the north of Sweden. Now, the lights that you see here they installed 30 of these. They transformed 30 bus stations around the city into what they refer to as light therapy stations. They removed the normal lights in these advertising cases, and they replaced them with light therapy bulbs, the bulbs that give natural daylight frequencies that you can kind of sit in front of during the winter. Because that far north in Sweden, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, in the north of Norway, there's very little daylight, sometimes no daylight at all during the day in the north. And so now, while people wait for the bus in the winter, they can get the good natural daylight vibes from the rays in these tubes and then continue on. There's two things about this project that are exceptional. One is bus ridership increased by 50% after they installed these light bulbs. And I like to think there's like hundreds of people in the city now going, I don't know why, but I just love taking the bus. And the other thing is how incredibly resourceful the strategy behind this is if you went to the city of Oslo right now and said, we need to install 30 light therapy chambers around the city, people would go, that's insane, we don't have the money, it would take millions, and it would take a year for planning permissions. They just rented the advertising space, and rather than put an advertisement there, they swapped the light bulbs. It was an incredibly quick, genius thing, and it allowed the bus stop to metamorphosize into something completely new. And what's the extra ability? I've already shown you the bridge and the extra ability. So we've got a checklist here. Can its function or service be improved? Can it host a plug-in structure? Can it be upgraded? Can it be a platform for another activity? Can it be revitalized to have a second life? And this is what I want you to kind of think about. We've already shown you, like, this is a trash system that's function can be improved. Or a stairway in Hong Kong that can be a plug-in for another function, another service. Or a bus stop that can be upgraded to do more. And the last couple slides, I just want to kind of point out that right now a lot of people look at these projects and think, well, those are fun projects. But that's because your teacup is still full. If we thought of reprogramming the city and what it kind of does, what its function is I consider it very low in the fun, the signal. There's some fun there, but that's not the signal that reprogramming the city is sending out. I have a great sense of mission with the project. And that mission is real-world resourceful problem solving. One project I haven't shown is the billboard in Lima, Peru, which has been converted into a giant dehumidifier that pulls moisture out of the air and turns it into fresh drinking water at its base. The last slides is just looking at the methodology, looking at what reprogramming the city does from a political, people, environment, and economy perspective. How it can accommodate all these different interests. Because reprogramming the city represents an agile response to accelerated urban change and responsibilities. If you really think about the way that cities change, the way the social needs change, is that needs change more quickly than cement and steel is able to. A neighborhood's needs will change much more quickly than you're able to actually change the physical neighborhood. So reprogramming allows fluid responses to shifting needs. Reprogramming is a new model for a circular economy and urban planning. It's resource aware, and that's vitally important. You're aware of the resources that you have to counter urban obsolescence, as traffic meters and even newspaper boxes, which now seems almost antiquated. As all these things go away, this is a strategy to bring them back into life rather than just discarding them. And finally, it's a toolkit for distributed modular response at a human scale. It's a platform for community engagement and empowerment. Because when you begin to use the familiar objects of the city in a new way, it lowers the bar for participation. You don't need to sell the big idea because people understand the existing fabric that you're working with. And that's what reprogramming the city is, and I think that's the opportunity for Oslo, is looking at the existing city and saying, how can we do more with the assets that we already have? So all I ask of you is the next time you're in the city, whether you're a professional or citizen, to look around you and realize that there's a lot more room for your understanding of what is possible in the city than you currently have. Thank you very much.